Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are delighted to welcome Angela Lee. Angela Lee is a professor of practice and the Chief Innovation Officer at Columbia Business School, where she teaches courses in venture capital and leadership. She brings 20 years of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship experience to the classroom. Angela started her career in product management and moved into strategy consulting at McKinsey. She's passionate about entrepreneurship and started several companies in the education sector. She's also a startup investor and the founder of 37 Angels, an investing network that has evaluated 150,000 startups, invested in 60, and activates new investors through a startup investment bootcamp. We are incredibly fortunate to have Angela Lee joining us this afternoon. Please remember to submit your questions throughout the session into the chat function. And with that, I'll give it over to Angela Lee.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides. And I'm really excited to be here. I hope that you are enjoying the day, and I hope that folks are getting to interact and ask questions. I know that this is in the weird and wacky world of Zoom, but I really do want this to feel as interactive as possible. So please, please, please ask questions as I'm going along, and we're going to dive right in. So what I want to talk about a little bit today was lessons in innovation and entrepreneurship. And I really struggled in terms of what to talk about because I teach an entire course on innovation and an entire course on entrepreneurship. And I really struggled to think what would be most interesting to this group. So I kind of settled in on talking about three main themes based off of my background, which folks already mentioned. And so I am coming at this as a founder, as an investor, as a strategy consultant, and these days as a professor. But given that context, I wanted to share basically what are three things that I thought would be interesting to answer today. So the first is, given what's happening in the career landscape generally, what is that doing in terms of curriculum? What are higher ed institutions, one of them being Columbia, what are we doing to think about curriculum and kind of agile course development? The second is I thought I would take a little bit of the lessons from the courses that I teach on innovation, on entrepreneurship, and share lessons that I thought would be useful to anybody who is listening in and kind of give you a sneak peek about what some of the things are that we're teaching in the classroom these days. So that's what I thought I would go over. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that changing career landscape. And so normally, if we were in the room together, I would have you all guess what these numbers represent. But given that we're over Zoom, I will just share that right now, people on average have a job for 4.2 years. And we all are going to change jobs 10 to 15 times over the lifetime of our career. That is a lot of job changing. And those of us who change jobs, 70% of us change those jobs within the first 2 years. And so the reason why 4.2 might actually seem long to some of you, and the reason why is because there are people who are at a company for 25 years skewing up the average, but for a lot of us, we're changing jobs every couple of years, and that is increasing for younger generations. And so people are changing around a lot. And what this means for educators is it means that we have to think about training people in an agile way. At Columbia, we often talk about future-proofing the curriculum, and it's not about what do our graduates need in 2 years and 5 years, but 20 years post-graduation, how do we arm them with the skills of knowing how to navigate their career and think about upskilling? So I just want to talk about some of the things that are, I think all top business schools are teaching these days. And for those of you who are involved in professional development, for those of you who are involved in thinking about, education for yourself or for maybe children in your household, I thought it would be useful to let you know what all the top business schools are teaching these days. So in terms of soft skills, in terms of hard skills, I thought I would start there because these are shorter and easier to think about. Most schools, and this is at the MBA level, but also at the undergraduate level, even liberal arts schools, I find are sending their students and saying, you need to understand these things. So data analysis, I think, gone are the days where simply knowing Excel is enough. I do think that these days folks need to be understanding what does it mean to navigate data at a larger scale. So thinking about big data, one of our core courses is on business analytics, and everybody needs to know how to navigate data beyond just in Excel. I'm old enough to remember when Excel was under 1 million rows, and when we had too much data, we would have to go into Microsoft Access. And I remember my computer being so slow that I used to have two laptops. One, I would run a query and do some analysis, and the other, I would do work in PowerPoint, whatever the case may be. And that is no longer a one-off, and I would argue it's expected. People need to know how to wade through data to derive insights and then portray those insights in a way that people can visualize. I think Tableau, I know it's one of the sponsors of today's conference, is one of the ways, and I think one of the most common ways people are thinking about data visualization, but there are other tools as well. And I think that comfort with large amounts of data, comfort with deriving insights from data, comfort from making recommendations that are actionable and grounded in data is something that everybody is going to have to do, regardless of what career they're pursuing. Similarly, I think that the idea of being technically literate is becoming increasingly important. So when you think about technical literacy, this does not mean knowing how to code. I don't think that everybody needs to know how to program and code, but I think that people need to not be afraid of technology and need to know how to grow with technology. So there are courses, for example, at General Assembly, they have a course called programming for non-programmers or programming for managers. But I think the idea of knowing how to work alongside technical people, maybe hire a technical team, write some business requirements, know what an API is, know what a full stack developer is. I think that these days you will be at a disadvantage if those are not words that you're somewhat familiar with. So, the language that we use often is being technically literate. So again, not knowing how to program, but knowing what the alphabet soup of technology, all those terms that are out there, what they mean. And by the way, I have some resources for all of you. If you're all feeling stressed right now, I have resources. And then the last thing is frontier tech. So frontier tech changes, right? Frontier tech is what is at the cutting edge of technology. So right now, it is machine learning and robotics. I would argue 5 years ago, it was Internet of Things. 5 years before that, big data was considered frontier tech and at the cutting edge of technology. And I think that these days it's important to subscribe to some sort of technical newsletter just so that, again, these terms you're familiar with, you're understanding the trends. For those of you who want homework and want to read about these things, a great resource is called Bessemer Atlas. I'll actually throw it into the chat window where it is Bessemer. Bessemer is a venture capital firm, and they have a resource called the Bessemer Atlas, where they write roadmaps of like the future of different industries. So if you want to read what some of the smartest people think about the future of active aging is, that's a space. What's the future of data? That's a great read. And it's a nice place to distill down all of this stuff. But I would just say once a month, be like, I'm going to read about a technology that's foreign to me. What is augmented reality? What is virtual reality, and what's the difference? And just having facility and comfort with those terms, I think, is really important. So that's kind of on the hard skill sides, really focused on data and technology. These are things that I think we're going to be increasingly forced to be familiar with going forward. From a soft skills perspective, this is where the list gets a little bit richer and I think certainly quite interesting. So not surprisingly, relationship building and communication, I think, is really important. A lot of schools these days have a core course which is just on relationship building, communications, and negotiations. Berkeley, for example, has in their core programming, everybody has to take a communications course. I teach a course called The Leader's Voice, which is all about relationship building and communicating. I think that because we're going to be changing jobs so often, we have to know how to build up the weak ties in our ecosystem. So weak ties are people who you don't know that well. Weak ties are people maybe you meet at a conference. They're people who are in a different major than you are. Maybe you work in the same organization, but they work in Singapore and you work in New York City. Weak ties are where innovation come from, and weak ties are where job opportunities come from. So really knowing how to keep in contact with your relationship is really important. This is especially true in the world of Zoom. By the way, I get asked all the time, how do you network in the age of Zoom? And one of my favorite things to do is to invite 10 people to a Zoom call. The reason why is because only 8 will show up, 7 or 8 will show up, and that's kind of a good manageable number. And then the way you kick off the call is everyone introduces themselves and they share an ask and a give, right? So my name is Angela Lee. An ask I have is right now I'm looking for somebody who can teach entrepreneurship through acquisition at Columbia. This is true. And a give I have is Bessemer Atlas, or a give I have is I know somebody who's hiring for a diversity and inclusion consultant in a nonprofit. All true, right? And what happens is it makes it a much easier way to have a conversation over Zoom, because otherwise we've all been on those Zoom happy hours where we're like, I don't really know what to talk about. And so it's a nice way to, in a coordinated way, do some networking, but also make some true connections and have tangible results come at the end of it. Because if every single person, let's say 8 people, everyone shares an ask and a give, a bunch of things come out of it. And I've never had one of these calls where at the end of it, 5 people weren't helped. So those are some of the things that I do. Given everything happening in the world, of course, we want to talk about inclusive and ethical leadership. So I think all the schools are teaching courses around ethics and teaching courses about inclusivity. And I mean inclusivity in a very inclusive way. I think that there's a tremendous amount of focus on gender and race, rightfully so, but thinking about introvert inclusion. I'm an introvert, right? And so how do we make it comfortable for people like me, for their voice to be heard in a meeting? What do you do with people who are part of the LGBTQ community? What language should you be using to make everybody feel like they're part of that social fabric? And so I think, again, I could talk for hours about that, but certainly something that we're all very focused on. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to have empathy and the ability to context shift. So if I think about all of the best leaders that I know, a lot of them came from multiple different contexts and they're really able to context shift. So what I mean by that is if I think about the most successful founders, again, an ecosystem I know very, very well, the best founders are the ones who are able to context shift and have deep empathy. So for example, I've started ed tech companies, I invest in ed tech companies, and I am a purchaser of education technology as the Chief Innovation Officer at Columbia Business School. And what I look for when I'm talking to somebody who's pitching me technology, whether as an investor or as a purchaser, is do they truly have empathy? Do you understand what the professor cares about, what the student cares about, what the dean cares about, and what alumni relationship cares about, right? Do you truly have that empathy? And the best business people are the ones who have deep customer empathy and they're able to context shift in that way. And that's related to cognitive flexibility. Decision making, we talk a lot about time management and decision making. It's a skill that can be taught, which is the good news. And it's a skill that most of us are not taught. And so how do you teach people to make decisions? And I'll end kind of the soft skills segment with the topic of metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about thinking and teaching people how to learn, right? Do you know if you're a better visual learner, a better kinetic learner, or a better auditory learner? Do you know the best way to learn a new skill? Do you know what time of day you're best at doing deep work? And metacognition is the idea of knowing how to learn and how to make people better learners. And so one thing that I think all of us as educators are responsible for these days is not just teaching people skills, but teaching people how to acquire skills 20 years from now when they're not in school anymore. So that's a topic that, again, I could talk for hours about. So now that I've stressed you out about all the things that you have to be learning, I just want to share some resources. So on the hard skill side, there are many, many kind of schools out there and platforms that teach a lot of these hard skills. General Assembly is international. They have in-person as well as online programs where you can learn a lot of the skills I mentioned. They have programming for non-programmers, programming for managers. 1 Month is an online only platform, and they've been online pre-COVID, where you can basically learn most technical skills in a month. They also have a course called Programming for Non-Programmers. You can learn Ruby on Rails in a month. You can learn Python in a month. You can learn SQL in a month. Great. And then, of course, lynda.com, one of the best ed tech exits that we've had in recent years, got acquired by LinkedIn. They're now LinkedIn Learning. They have a lot of bite-sized content where you're just like, I don't know how to do a VLOOKUP in Excel. Or, gosh, what does Tableau even look like? And so if you don't want to invest in a month-long course or a 12-week course, you can take a 30-minute or 90-minute module on lynda.com, now LinkedIn Learning. In terms of some of the softer skills, I cannot give you an exhaustive list of resources, but 3 books that I really love in this space are shown here. Give and Take is a fantastic book about networking and relationship building. And it's all about how do you give to your network in a thoughtful way where you're not being a doormat. Decisive is a great book about decision making. And then Art of Learning is a fantastic book about metacognition. Art of Learning was written by, for those of you who remember the book, Saving Bobby Fischer, the chess prodigy. It's written by him. And he was a chess prodigy and was world renowned. I want to say by the age of 16, quit and decided, I want to become an expert in Taekwondo. And he also mastered the art of Taekwondo. And the reason why the book is so interesting is because he talks about learning as a learned skill and how any of us can learn to do anything once you understand the parameters of learning. So again, Again, I'm an educator, so I like to geek out on that, but that's a fantastic book. And then for those of you who are like, I don't want to read a book, I don't have time to take a class, there's a great YouTube channel called Productivity Game. And it's a YouTube channel where he, probably like 3 times a week, he posts like a 7 to 10 minute video where he summarizes a book. And he only summarizes fantastic books. And he couples it with a 1-page PDF summary, which summarizes the book. So first of all, it's just saved me a lot of time because I don't have to read as many books as I used to. But on top of that, it tells me which of the books that I do want to invest in reading. So it's a YouTube channel called Productivity Game. Highly recommend. I tend to listen to it in the background while I'm putting on makeup in the morning or doing my hair. And it's just a really nice way to kick off the day feeling like you've learned something. So some resources for you. For those of you who are on the managerial side and thinking, how do I manage a group of people who are changing jobs all the time? And how do you have that conversation? 2 additional books for you all to read. The Alliance is written by Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. And he talks about the fact that there's this weird, like, dance that we do as a manager and as a direct report, where we both pretend that the relationship's going to be for a really long time, right? We both pretend that you're going to be working there for 5 to 10 years, when the reality is, as you see from the data, that people leave jobs every couple of years. And so Reid Hoffman in the Alliance basically says, lean into that. Acknowledge that your best and brightest employees are going to be with you for a couple of years and they're going to move on. And how do you invest in knowledge transfer? How do you invest in making those transitions as painless as possible? It's a great book to say, let's just be honest. You're awesome. You're only going to be here for 18 months before you get promoted or you leave or you go somewhere else. Let's figure out how to make the next 18 months as beneficial as win-win for both of us. And it's taught me how to be a better manager in the sense of, let's talk about how do we make this job interesting for you? So maybe you stay for 2.5 years instead of 18 months. How do we help you transition so that you're part of my network long-term? As a direct report, how do you have that awkward conversation of, I'm not learning and growing anymore, I want to move on to my next job? So Alliance is a great book. And then Radical Candor is all about being, as you can see, a kick-ass boss. And it's all about how to be really candid with your team in a nurturing and productive way. And so many good examples, so much language that I've directly pulled and used in one-on-ones, both great books about being a manager of this new evolving cohort of folks. And the reason why all schools right now are teaching innovation and entrepreneurship is because innovation and entrepreneurship teaches all of the things that I just talked about. We're talking about technology, we're talking about innovations in data, and we're talking about all of those soft skills. How do you network? How do you have agile decision-making? How do you have quick decision-making? How do you have cognitive flexibility? So that's why I think so many schools these days are teaching entrepreneurship and innovation, not because every school wants to graduate a bunch of founders every year, but because those skills teach you how to be prepared for any job in a broad way. So I'm going to dive into some lessons from the courses I teach on innovation and entrepreneurship. But before I do that, I want to see if there are any questions around the changing careers landscape. If there's a topic that you really want to learn that you'd love a book from me on, I have lists and lists of favorite books. I obviously only shared, I think, 4 or 5 in the deck, but if there are topics or resources that you're interested in, feel free to throw that into the chat window and I'm happy to respond. Or if people have favorite books or topics or resources on any of the things that I mentioned, you can also share it with the group because it's all good for us to be learning from each other. I'm gonna take a sip of water and take a quick pause to see if there are any questions. Any great books on angel investing? Yeah, so one great book on angel investing, it's not specifically on angel investing, but Venture Deals by Brad Feld is a great book on venture capital investing, and a lot of the lessons are applicable for angel investing. And a great blog is avc.com. This is written by Fred Wilson, and it's avc.com. And Joanne Wilson is Gotham. Joanne Wilson, she goes by @GothamGal on Twitter. She has a great blog. It's a mix of personal and professional, but she's invested in 160 companies as an angel investor, and she's a great resource and a good role model for those of you who are aspiring angels. And then I will give a shout out to 37 Angels. So 37 Angels We are an angel investing network. We have about 80 women investors. We've invested in 70 companies to date. We have a portfolio IRR of over 20%. We also teach women how to be angel investors or venture capitalists. And so we have a boot camp that teaches you how to do that. And so that would be the last resource, I would say, in terms of recommendations on angel investing. Okay, so I'm going to dive into lessons in innovation and just share some lessons there. And then I'll talk about entrepreneurship and angel investing to close. So in terms of lessons in innovation, I think there are two myths in creativity and innovation that are not true. So one is, years and years ago, it became really popular that we were either right-brained or left-brained. And so you're either born creative or you're not. And that is absolutely not true. The left brain, right brain thing, I'm sorry to tell you all, is not true. And the reality is you can learn how to be creative and innovative because innovation and creativity isn't you walk down the street and you get hit with a bolt of lightning and you're like, I have the most amazing idea ever. Innovation and creativity, it's a process that can be taught, and it's a process that you can be facilitated through. So I wanted to share just a couple of high-level tips and tricks for those of you, you're walking into a meeting and you're like, we are being so boring and not coming up with any new ideas. Maybe you want to think about starting a company on your own and how can I be creative? So to do that, the very simple version of the process is you have to first be divergent and then be convergent. So being divergent and being really wide and expansive in your thinking and then converging down. So one way to be divergent is to increase the number of weak ties in your network. So I mentioned this before. Blue dots are your strong ties. These are people who you have lots and lots of connections with. You went to school together, you work together, you are on the same intramural soccer team together. Those red dots are people you don't know that well, right? You meet them at a conference or in a different department. And what the data shows is that innovation and idea generation comes from those red dots, those weak ties. Why? Because they're listening to different podcasts, they're reading different newsletters, they are engaging on different stuff, and so their ideas are different. So the best way to be innovative in your life and to be divergent in your life is to talk to people who are your weak ties, engage with them, go to maybe not coffee with them right now, but go on walks with them that are outdoors and safely distanced, or have Zoom meetings with them where you're talking about your ideas. I have a really dear friend who works in the construction industry. We are in completely unrelated fields. We get together once a quarter and we talk about ideas. And every single time I have a conversation with her, ideas emerge, or something that I'm learning from what she's doing in her construction company, I can do with 37 Angels in our investing company. So nurture the weak ties in your relationship. The second thing is to make it okay for conflict to exist. People hate conflict, and I'm going to go so far as to say women probably dislike it even more. And so a lot of people are really anti-conflict and they don't like to have that conversation. And what I tell everybody is to change the energy of conflict, right? So if you think about conflict, I like to picture this image, right? And this image is an optical illusion. And as you can see, from one side, you've got 4 bars, and from the other side, you've got 3 bars. And what happens when we have an argument is it's 2 people going, there are 3 bars, there are 4 bars, there are 3 bars, there are 4 bars. And I want you to just stop that energy and to instead ask the question, can you explain to me why you see 3 bars? And then all of a sudden, the energy of conflict is changed. And it's not 2 people asking and saying, no, I'm right, you're wrong. But it's, let's understand why you see 3 bars. It's probably because you're coming at this with different data, with different contexts, with different understandings. And once my goal is to understand why you see 3 bars, understanding is created. And I truly believe that if we all adopted this mindset, world peace would be achieved. And to make this okay. So as a manager, as a facilitator, as a meeting coordinator, when you sense conflict, right, as opposed to being the 2 sides, let's say, okay, let's take a minute and let's talk about what are the assumptions we're making that leads us to think this is a $100 million idea or a $5 million idea. And I promise you, if you ask the question, help me understand why you think this is a terrible idea, I promise you, you will have richer conversations and less conflict and more understanding. I'm a huge fan of Post-it notes to increase divergence and to make conflict more comfortable, right? Imagine I walk into a room and I say that we are going to fire half the people, right? People are going to start being really upset. People are scared to talk. Let's say I want to launch a diversity initiative where we have a hiring mandate on people of color or women or people from the LGBTQ community. And I'm like, we're going to have a hiring mandate. Let's talk about this. People are going to be scared to have that conversation because they don't want to be seen as the negative person in the room. It's a very difficult thing to have. But if you say, we are considering having a hiring quota around diversity, I would get everyone 2 Post-it notes. What's one thing that concerns you about this? And what's one thing that you think we could do to improve it? And it's going to be anonymized, and let's pass around. I will read them all off. I won't attribute them to any names. Imagine the richness of the dialogue you will have instead. So I'm a big fan of kicking off meetings with Post-it notes because oftentimes the most senior, loud voices get heard and everybody else kind of follows suit. A more structured way to be divergent is to use the 6 thinking hats. This comes from a book called 6 Thinking Hats. And the idea is that you assign everyone a role. So let's say that's the goal. We're having a meeting where we're going to talk about having diversity quotas in hiring. I'm the blue hat. I'm the facilitator. I want one person to wear the green hat. She's going to be really creative and think of really zany ideas. The zanier, the better. The black hat is going to poke holes. They're going to say, this is all the reasons why this is a terrible idea. The yellow hat's going to say, this is all, they're going to be a champion. They're going to be a cheerleader. These are all the reasons why this is a fantastic idea. The white hat has to bring in data. So if you want to make a comment, if you want to make a suggestion, it has to be backed by objective data. And then the red hat is going to completely abandon data and be the intuitive hat. They're going to say, how might this make people feel? What's this going to look like from a PR perspective? And this is a great way to have a difficult conversation in a way that gives people permission to voice their opinions. You can have everyone wear a hat for the entire meeting. You can switch hat colors. You can say for the next 10 minutes, we're going to have a black hat meeting and everyone gets to poke holes. I give you permission to tell me why this is a terrible idea. And it's a great way to get a variety of voices. The last divergent tool I will share is Scamper. It is an oldie but a goodie, but Scamper is saying, I'm trying to be innovative and come up with new ideas. Let me run through the Scamper acronym and talk about how to think about product ideas. So I'm not going to go through all of the letters because some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but in terms of combine, I'm assuming some of you saw earlier in the year, obviously pre-COVID, that Kohl's and Amazon partnered where you can now do pickups and drop-offs at Kohl's stores. And this is a great way to combine forces where Kohl's has the physical real estate and they don't want to compete with Amazon. They've joined forces, they've combined to make something better. Put to another use is an interesting one, where for those of you who live in Los Angeles, there is a cupcake chain there called Sprinkles, and Sprinkles has cupcake ATM. So you can walk up and you can order a cupcake without talking to anybody. It's ATM technology that they've put to another use. In terms of eliminate, I don't know if all of you saw this, but it's how can we eliminate what we think is critical? So for example, how can we eliminate the teachers from teaching? And it forces you to be really, really innovative. But recently, Whitney Houston had a concert. I want to say this happened in 2019 using a hologram. And so you would think that the most critical thing about a concert is the singer. But they've managed to eliminate the singer in this way and do it through holograms. And so by forcing you to go through each of the different letters, it forces you to be creative. Reverse is how do you take something and reverse it? So for example, with online shopping, all of us hate returns, right? As the customer, you hate it. You have to go to the post office. You have to look for bubble tape. You have to package it up. The seller hates it. They get damaged merchandise. They are losing money. And Warby Parker turned the return process on its head and made it a delight. They said, I know you're going to return your eyeglasses, and so I'm going to reverse the dread of returning. And I'm going to say, I encourage you to return the glasses. And if anything, I'll make it a delight. I'll make the packaging really easy. I've got the sticky label for you. I've got a padded mailer for you, so you don't have to go find that. And they've made it a delight. And it's one of the reasons why they have so much market share, because they reversed the pain of online returns and made it into a positive. So thinking about the things that are terrible in your product life cycle, in your customer experience, how do you make it into a delight? So that's the Scamper acronym. It's a great one if you're just ever stuck and how do I make my product or service better? Run it through Scamper and I promise you interesting ideas will emerge. I'm going to spend a little bit less time on convergence, but some tools. One is fist of five. So adults don't like raising their hands. I don't know why. So whenever I am in a large meeting and I need to get people to align, if you say, raise your hand if you think it's a good idea, very few people will raise their hand. But if you say, everyone raise your hand and hold up 5 fingers. If you think it's a great idea, keep all 5 fingers up. If you think it's a terrible idea, hold up 0 fingers. If you think it's kind of meh, 3 fingers. Or you can say, everyone raise your hand, thumbs up, thumbs down, mediocre. But it's a great way to get everyone involved because I just find that adults don't like raising their hand. And if you just say yay or nay, you get like 30% participation. Pair ranking is what we all do at the optometrist. Do you like A or B, B or C, C or D? And it forces you to converge. I have 15 ideas. You get 100 points. Assign them to the 15. The ones with the most points emerge up top. When I'm in a physical room, I will often have the ideas listed on a big whiteboard. Everyone gets 3 tiny Post-it notes, and you get to put them next to the ideas that you like the best. These are all ways to get people to converge on an idea. Because I'm a recovering management consultant, I love a good 2x2 matrix, and this is a really popular one. I have 50 ideas. Which ones are highly impactful and really easy to do? Let's do those first. If something is not going to have a lot of impact and it's really difficult, don't do that thing, right? And then the top left tends to be easy wins. The bottom right tends to be big, hairy, audacious projects. And so that's another way to converge. And given that we're all in a Zoom world, these are 2 digital tools that I use all the time to converge. Ballooner lets people put ideas and then you upvote them and the balloons go up top. This is actually how one of the recent Disney movies was ideated. And then Poll Everywhere is an online polling tool that you can use on your smartphone. It's free for up to 40 participants. I use these in meetings all the time to get people to vote on an idea. You can make it anonymous or not anonymous, and it's like free for up to 50 people, I think. I just threw a lot at you. So questions on innovation, anything that I cover that you want me to go over a little bit more slowly before we dive into kind of entrepreneurship, angel investing learnings? I'm seeing some new people trickling in. So just by way of introduction, hi, my name is Angela Lee. I teach at Columbia Business School, mainly venture capital and leadership courses. I'm also the founder of 37 Angels. We are an angel investing network based in New York City. It's 80 women investors. We've invested in 70 companies to date, and we teach people how to become angel investors through an investment bootcamp. And people become angel investors or get into venture capital through our program. So that is what I do. And I'm a former founder as well. Okay, so I'm going to dive into lessons in entrepreneurship, and we will wrap up. So just to give you a sense, so 37 Angels, every year, this is what happens. We look at about 2,500 companies. We'll meet with about 600 of them. We will pick the best ones to introduce to our angels. We will diligence a subset of them, and we basically make 10 investments per year. It is a very wide funnel. So we look at 2,500 companies a year, and we invest in 10. And I share this because for those of you who are interested in startup investing, as an investor, it's good to be a part of a network so you get the benefit of deal curation. Or if you're going to do it solo, be prepared to set aside a significant amount of time so that you can be looking at a lot of deals. For those of you who are founders, it's good to know that you're going to have to talk to lots and lots of investors to get that first check. So we are early stage investors, meaning we're investing usually between $100,000 and $200,000 into early stage startups. And as I mentioned, we've done 70 investments in about 7 years. So we do 10 a year. So a question I get asked all the time is, what is it that investors look for in early stage investments? And we look at 4 things. I like alliteration. We look at people, problem, progress, and price. So I'm going to go into these one by one. So from a people perspective, the biggest thing we're looking at is we're looking at domain expertise, and specifically relevant domain expertise. So this is a company we looked at recently. They do customer acquisition powered by AI. So they are helping salespeople find the best people to target to hopefully sell things to them, and they're doing it through artificial intelligence. They're basically doing natural language processing on LinkedIn. And the team is very experienced, right? So you have a CEO who has a marketing tech background, who has sold companies before. You have a head of business development who was their customer, right? So he really understands the customer because he was their customer and also has some good startup experience. For those of you who want to throw into the chat window, what is missing from the team experience? What would you want to see in the team experience that's not listed there as a bullet point? Let's see if we can make this a little bit interactive. So the question is, what is missing from the co-founder background that you would want to see given what this company is doing? Yes, thank you, Sonia. Deep AI experience, right? It's so obvious, but we see this all the time, where a startup is doing X, but the founding team doesn't have X. Exactly. So we are looking for people who have deep AI experience. And again, it sounds obvious, but it's shocking that I would argue a solid third of the pitches I see is something deeply rooted in data science. It's something deeply rooted in augmented reality, and the founders don't have that experience. So that's the first thing around people. We will look for deep domain expertise. Secondarily, we look for complementary skills, right? We don't want three people who were all lawyers who, all come from the mortgage industry. We want one person who's an amazing finance person, one person who's an amazing salesperson, one person who's amazing at operations. And so we want complementary skill sets. That's what we primarily look for in people. In terms of problem, we're looking for really large markets. And so we get pitched a lot of decks that look like this, right? Our market is 33 women in the United States. We know that women spend 3 times on healthcare what they do on men. So our TAM, our total addressable market, is $5.6 billion. I see slides that look like this literally every day. Now, this is great. This is a big market. But what's important as an investor is, what is the relevant market? So this was a startup that we looked at that specifically does dermatological appointments. It's a hard word to say. Through telemedicine. And so I could have you all, this is always awkward, but you could look at my face and say, do I need Botox, right? So I could have an appointment with a dermatologist, and he or she could tell me, do I need Botox? Do I need fillers? Do I need a peel or something like that? And it saves me from having to go in person. And that's great. And it's a big market, but these numbers aren't exactly relevant to that market. So what we look for is founders who are able to deeply understand their customer and their market in 3 ways. So the first is, what is the customer demographic? So we know it's women. They have age, which is good, but what about income level? What about education level? Are these women who live specifically in rural areas so they can't get to a dermatologist, or are these people living in urban areas and it's more of a convenience thing? So demographically, what is their customer base? The second is psychographics. So psychographics are the lifestyle, the persona, the avatar of your customer. So if you all right now picture in your head like a Whole Foods shopper versus a Trader Joe's shopper, you can kind of picture who they are a little bit differently. The person who reads Martha Stewart magazine versus the person who reads Dwell magazine, right? Dwell's a little bit younger, it's a little bit trendier. Martha Stewart's a little bit older, maybe a little bit up market, right? But you can tell the markets, right? A Marie Claire reader versus a Vogue reader, right? You can get a sense of who that customer is. Think about the makeup brands Glossier versus Kat Von D, right? Kat Von D is very goth, all the packaging is very black. It's like a very edgy brand, whereas Glossier, everything's like muted colors. The packaging is very light colored. You imagine the Glossier woman in a room with basking in sunlight. Everything's white around her, right? Like that's the Glossier woman. And so when we think about psychographic, we look for founders who can describe their customer very well in terms of lifestyle preferences, that persona. So that's demographics and psychographics. And the last thing is, what is the problem you're solving for them? So in the case of this dermatological startup, are they solving convenience? Are they solving cost? Or are they solving access, right? So is it that people are trying to save money and maybe this costs $50, whereas a consultation, if you go in person, costs $200? Or is it that people can't physically get to a dermatologist? And this is for people who are in more remote areas. Or is it just about convenience, right? This will take me 15 minutes versus I have to go all the way downtown to an office. And being really, really crystal clear about the problem they're solving. So that's what we look for with problem, is large markets that are relevant, that where the founders deeply understand the customer. And for us, a large market is we need to believe that they can be making $25 million a year. So we need to believe that the market's large enough where they can make $25 million a year in revenue. And we assume they're only going to capture 5 to 10% of the market. So that is problem. The third P is progress, right? How much progress, how much traction do you need to have? And I get asked all the time, how much revenue do I have to have before I can pitch you? How much revenue do I have to have before I can pitch a VC? And what I tell them always is that it's not about the absolute number, it's about the repeatability of that progress. So we have had many startups pitch us who've been on Shark Tank or Oprah. And you'll see their revenue numbers spike one month where they have hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales because they were on Shark Tank or they were on Oprah. That's obviously a good thing, but it's not repeatable. We look for repeatable progress. And so being on Oprah is good, but what's better is that you have a repeatable customer acquisition engine. So a repeatable customer acquisition engine says, hey, investor, when I emailed 10,000 people, I know that 500 click on the email, 500 open the email, 200 click, and I get 10 customers. I know that it costs me $20 to acquire those customers. Why? Because I had to pay for the email list, I had to pay for a copywriter, I had to pay for MailChimp. All in all, based off of my open rate and my click rate, it cost me $20 to acquire customers through email. And those customers spend $100 with me on average. That is a customer acquisition machine where you know your customer acquisition cost and you know your customer lifetime value. And that equation, that ratio is the magical ratio that investors are investing in. I am giving you a bunch of $20 to go make a bunch of $100. And for most investors, the ratio between those two numbers has to be 3 to 1. So I have to be making 3 times the customer lifetime value as the customer acquisition cost. So if it costs you $20 to acquire a customer, they have to be spending at least $60 with you over the lifetime of their experience. And the acronyms are CAC to customer lifetime value ratio, or CAC to lifetime value ratio. LTV and CLV are the same thing. Customer lifetime value or lifetime value, they're synonymous, but that's the magical ratio. That's what I, as an investor, am investing in, that ratio, that customer acquisition machine, because it's repeatable. If you're like, I don't know about customer acquisition, then more homework for you. This is a great book called Traction by Gabriel Weinberg. By the way, there are a couple of books called Traction, so this is a good one to focus on. And they walk you through the 19 different customer acquisition channels. So if you're like, I don't know how to do influencer marketing, I don't know how to do search engine optimization. So when somebody types in remote dermatology, my name pops up highest on Google. And so it's a great handbook on how to do customer acquisition that's written in a very easy to digest way. I thought I would end on some resources around angel investing and venture capital. And so Sonia, I mentioned this already, but Venture Deals is a great book if you just want to read about the venture capital space and term sheets. Lean Startup and Rework are really great books that, as a founder, how do I very quickly get a product to market? And how do I run a lot of fast failing experiments? 37 Angels, we have a few resources for you. We have an investment bootcamp. If you want to learn how to be an angel investor, if you want to learn how to be a venture capitalist, we do 5 bootcamps a year. We have a 2-day format and we have an 8-week format. The 2-day format is very intense. It is all condensed together. It's in New York or over Zoom. And then the 8-week is online. It's a little bit more of a relaxed pace, but we offer it 5 times a year. We have a glossary. If you're like, I just don't know what that term means, you can go on and look at the glossary. And we have a huge list of resources specifically for female founders. We have people who are specifically funding female founders, and we just have accelerators and other resources for female founders. And so that's a really, really great list for you to take a look at if you want to do some research. That is everything that I had. I'm happy to take questions at this point about anything that I've talked about. I'll leave this up if folks want to take notes, but I'm happy to answer questions about higher ed curriculum and the changing career landscape. I'm happy to answer questions about innovation in corporate America. I do a lot of corporate training on how do you take kind of that startup mindset and bring it to corporate America. And I'm also happy to answer any questions about fundraising, about angel investing, about investing in venture capital. Any and all, I'm happy to answer questions. If there are not questions, then I'm also happy to give folks 15 minutes of their time back. I know that there's a lot of programming. Christina and her team have done a really amazing job of putting together some really, really awesome programming. So I hope that you're enjoying it and that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Aparna, our Angel Investor Bootcamp is $4,500. So you get the bootcamp and you also are a member of the network for a year. So you get access to our curated deal flow and our events, and you remember the network for a year. Any exciting emerging fields for investment? Yeah, so right now, a couple of fields that are really exciting. So future of work, a lot of people are talking about. Future of work kind of breaks down into three areas. One is serving the non-traditional worker. So 40% of the US is currently non-W2, meaning we're part-time, we're remote workers, we're digital nomads, so 40%. And so how do you serve them? How do you help them save for retirement? How do you help them manage their taxes? How do you help them get benefits? How do you help us all engage and have a corporate culture over Zoom? Right now, all of us are non-traditional workers because of COVID, but future of work is definitely one area. So that's one space. And then the other is worker automation. So robotics, replacing workers with robots. I just saw a really interesting thing that Marvel, which I'm assuming all of you have watched the Marvel movies, they're replacing stunt people with robots. For safety reasons, but also so they can figure out like, how is this person going to flip through the air so I can figure out the arc of my camera and what crane I need. I don't have to use a human body in that case or a stunt double. I can use a robot. And so it's crazy the things that are being displaced by robots these days. But future of work are those two areas. So that's one space that we invest a lot in. Another space that's really interesting is active aging, right? We are in an aging world. So you'll sometimes hear this called silver tech, right? Because older people have silver hair. So silver tech, active aging is another space that's quite interesting. Given COVID, not surprising, telemedicine is an emerging space. And I think there will be structural changes made to telemedicine, remote medicine as a result of COVID. And then the last thing I'll mention is logistics tech. I think logistics tech is a really interesting space right now. It was certainly interesting before COVID, but even more so now. How do you think about a truck fleet and figuring out where they are in the world and optimizing inventory placement if you have a global or a national warehouse structure? So logistics tech. So, and 37 Angels specifically invests in future of work, logistics tech, digital health, and we also do consumer packaged goods, but those are some spaces that are kind of emerging and exciting areas. Which venture capital firms do you follow? Any newsletters that I like? Yes, so a couple of newsletters that I really like around data. So if you like data, then PitchBook and CB Insights, which is created by Crunchbase, they're really great for data. And then Halo Report, they do a quarterly report on the state of the angel ecosystem. So who's getting funded, what's the evaluation, what geographies are doing a lot of funding. Those are great from a data perspective. If you more want to keep up with trends, then I like VentureBeat and TechCrunch. Those are the newsletters that I follow. In terms of VC firms that I follow, I think that I tend to follow the firms that we co-invest with in New York City, but also firms that are putting out a lot of thought leadership. So I mentioned Bessemer has Bessemer Atlas, but some of the firms that I really like are Union Square Ventures in New York City, Lair Happo in New York City, and RRE and Graycroft. Those are probably the four firms that I work the most closely with here in New York City. I'd say out on the West Coast, we've got obviously Andreessen Horowitz, Bessemer, Sequoia, but those are some of the firms that I like and some of the newsletters I'm following. I'm going to wrap us for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And with that, stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope that you are all doing well. Thank you.